Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today we are at Kincaid Park, which is a park in the western part of the city of Anchorage. In fact, it's the westernmost tip of the city of Anchorage, and a big block of land set aside for public use. There's a lot of stuff that goes on at Kincaid Park. There is kind of a functioning center of the park where you have a function room. I guess I didn't just think up the word function from nowhere, but anyway, no, there's a function room there, and there is a soccer field. During the summertime, there's a playground you can take the kids to, but it's a really big park, and there are a lot of trails out here. And during the summertime, that's devoted to mostly biking, I think, and then during the wintertime, you have groomed trails all over the place for cross-country skiers, and mostly for them. The snowshoers like to have a little bit of a chance at it, but they usually get pushed out of the way. This park is it's a beautiful place, really nice place to go. I'm really hoping that this scene kind of shows how beautiful it is. I'm not sure what's going to show up on the video, but you can just see across the Cook Inlet there to one of the mountains across the way, and it's just a nice scene. So anyway, today we're going to be having a look at Psalm 29. Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due His name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, the Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth, and strips the forest bare, and in His temple all cry, Glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as King forever. May the Lord give strength to His people. May the Lord bless His people with peace. If there's one thing that preachers are guilty of, it's using big words to describe God. We like the omni words. We like the words omniscient, omnipresent, omnijust, even though that's probably not really a word. Omnibenevolent, which again is questionable. But we put omni in front of these words that you may or may not recognize because omni means all. Omnipotent or omnipotent means all-powerful. Now, I can say that, but what does that really mean? For the psalmist, it meant that God was more powerful than anything, including the most powerful things that he could imagine in the realm of nature. As the creator of nature, God was the creator of the elements within the natural world, and so He was enthroned over these things. And in fact, in some small way, the psalmist thought, we can picture the power of God when we picture the power of the natural world. I love the way the Psalms look to the natural world as a description of God. In Psalm 8, you see the psalmist reflecting on a starry night and reflecting upon his place in the universe. In Psalm 19, you see him reflecting on the firmament, but in particular on the circuit of the sun, and he says that pattern that plays out day after day, it portrays and proclaims the glory of God. Well, in Psalm 29, what you have the psalmist doing is identifying God in the power of a thunderstorm. Now, the thunderstorm is described in very poetic language, and the word thunderstorm is never found. But I want you to look at this poetic language with me and see if you can't see the idea of a thunderstorm inside of it. So he says here, the voice in verse 3 of the Lord is over the waters. In the land where the psalmist lived, or the various psalmists lived, the storms would come from the Mediterranean Sea, and so they would start over the sea and then come upon the land. And so he says, the voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders over many waters. And he hears this thunder and he says, how powerful must the voice of the Lord be, given how powerful this thunder is. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. You can imagine the storm has now come over land, and it's beginning to send out lightning strikes, and you can see that lightning striking one of the cedar trees and how it splits when that happens. And so again, the Lord is behind that and over that, and He created that, and so His power is proclaimed in it. The Lord makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The entire world shakes and quakes with the sound of this thunderstorm. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. It's not uncommon in that part of the world for lightning strikes to cause fire. And so again, this great display of nature's power is a display for the psalmist of God's power. He says the voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness in verse 8. And again, the quaking and the shaking that come with lightning. Verse 9, the voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth. So the animals are startled and perhaps forced into premature delivery. It strips the forest bare. The fire and the lightning, lay waste the forest. And maybe that's yet another description of animals fleeing. But notice, in his temple all cry glory. Worshippers aren't afraid of the natural world. Worshippers aren't afraid of anything but the God who created everything. And so when they see these things, they say, wow, how glorious and how majestic must our God be. And that's why this psalm, which describes a thunderstorm, doesn't begin, as sometimes thunderstorm stories do, with a person describing how afraid they are of a thunderstorm. This psalm begins, and in fact ends, with the concept of worship. The psalmist has reflected upon the glory of God in a thunderstorm, and he says, how amazing is this God? He says in verse 1, ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, the highest beings that he can imagine. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. No, that's not enough. In verse 2, ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. You want to describe the majesty, the strength, the glory of the Lord? Well, you've got to try to do it in a way that's due his name. And the only way to give him the proper glory is to attempt to worship him in the splendor, or as other versions put it, in the beauty of holiness. He says we've got to be the best that we can because we serve an awesome and mighty God. He sees the Lord as over all these things. Again in verse 10, the Lord sits enthroned over the flood. He sits enthroned as king forever. And so he says this God is worthy of our worship. The psalm concludes with a hope that this God who has displayed his strength in nature, that this God will share his strength with those who serve him. And so he says, may the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. And indeed, no better way could we conclude our talk on this psalm than to say that, may the strength of the Lord be with you, and may the peace of the Lord be with you.